He stood in that hospital hallway at 2 a.m., still in his dress shirt from the wedding, and he just stopped walking. Not because he was tired, because he finally heard it replaying in his head like a flat line that wouldn't quit. "I wish you meant that." 4 words. Barely a whisper. And somehow, they hit harder than anything he'd survived in the last 3 years. This is the story of a man who spent 2 years calling it nothing, until one sentence at a stranger's wedding table made him realize he'd been lying to himself the whole time. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it hits you somewhere deep, subscribe. Because this one, it's going somewhere real. The first thing you need to understand about Solomon Reeves is that he does not make mistakes. Not in the operating room. Not in a diagnosis. Not in the way he structures a sentence when he's delivering news that will change someone's life forever. He is precise. He is careful. He is the kind of man who reads the entire contract before he signs his name. The kind of man who checks the weather app at 5:47 every morning, not because he needs to, but because not knowing feels reckless. So when Solomon tells you that what happened between him and the woman in apartment 4B was nothing serious, you have to understand something. He is not lying to you, he is lying to himself. And the difference matters more than you think. Nashville in October has a particular kind of cold, not brutal, not dramatic, just honest. The kind of cold that creeps under a coat collar and reminds you that warmth is something you have to choose. Solomon had lived in apartment 4A of the Carver building for 2.5 years, and he had made peace with most things about his life there. The divorced father routine, the alternating Tuesdays and every other weekend schedule with his 9-year-old son Miles. The way the elevator took exactly 11 seconds longer than it should. The smell of whatever his neighbor cooked on Thursday nights that was always without exception, slightly too much garlic. He had made peace with all of it. What he had not made peace with, what he refused in fact to name, was the particular feeling he got every Friday night when he heard the deadbolt in apartment 4B click open, followed by the sound of high heels being kicked off against a hardwood floor, followed by 3 seconds of absolute silence before the television came on. He knew that sequence the way he knew a patient's chart. Completely, without thinking. He had never asked himself why. Dutton. Celeste Navarro had moved into 4B 27 months ago on a Wednesday afternoon, and Solomon had first seen her the way most people first experience something that will change their life completely by accident while looking somewhere else entirely. He'd been checking his mail. She'd been arguing on her phone, not loudly, not unprofessionally, but with the controlled surgical precision of someone who had been trained to dismantle an opposing argument and leave it bleeding on the floor before the other person even realized what happened. "No, listen to me," she was saying into the phone keys in one hand, a box of files balanced against her hip. "I didn't say that was wrong. I said it was inadmissible. Those are not the same thing, and if you can't see the difference, then we have a bigger problem than the Whitmore case." She didn't look at Solomon. She didn't acknowledge him at all. She just walked to the elevator, pressed the button with her elbow, because her hands were full, and kept arguing calm sharp, completely unbothered by the fact that she was utterly dismantling someone's legal strategy in the lobby of a residential building at 6:15 on a Wednesday evening. Solomon had watched her step into the elevator. The doors had closed. He had stood there with his mail still in his hand and thought with a clarity that surprised him. That woman is dangerous. He had meant it as a warning to himself. He had not listened. The friendship, if you could even call it that in the beginning, grew the way most things grow between people who are too smart to admit they need something. Slowly, with a lot of denial in between. It started with medicine, literally. 3 weeks after she moved in, Celeste knocked on his door at 10:48 p.m. He remembered because he'd just finished a chart review and was about to make himself a sandwich, and when he opened it, she was standing there in a blazer she hadn't yet taken off, holding her left wrist with her right hand. "I think I sprained it," she said. "Not hello. Not sorry to bother you. Just the diagnosis delivered directly. I was told there's a doctor on this floor." "Who told you that?" "The building manager, when I complained about the elevator." Solomon looked at her wrist. "How'd you do it?" "Filing cabinet." "That's not how most people sprain a wrist." I wasn't pulling the drawer. I was closing it. On someone else's hand. He had paused at that. On purpose. She had met his eyes without blinking. He had it coming. He wrapped her wrist, gave her a cold pack, told her to keep it elevated. She said thank you with the brevity of someone who finds extended gratitude inefficient. She left. He made his sandwich, and he thought about her for the next 2 hours without understanding why. After that it built, quietly, in the way that only real things build, not with grand gestures, but with accumulation. She started borrowing things. Not constantly, not needily, just occasionally with the matter-of-fact ease of someone who had decided he was useful. Tylenol, a phone charger when hers broke at midnight before a 7 a.m. deposition. One Thursday, a cup of coffee when her machine died and she had 30 minutes before she had to leave. He started leaving his door unlocked on Thursday mornings. He never told her that. She never mentioned it. But she always came. The Friday nights started around month 4, and they started the way most true things start, as something else entirely. He had been watching a crime documentary, the kind Miles would not be allowed anywhere near, and somewhere around the 40-minute mark, there was a knock at the door. Celeste was in an oversized law school sweatshirt, no blazer, no armor. She had a glass of red wine in her hand. She said, "I finished my case prep. My TV is making a sound. Can I watch something over here?" "What kind of sound?" "I don't know, Solomon. A bad one. Are you going to let me in or not?" He stepped back from the door. She sat in the corner of his couch with 6 inches of cushion between them and watched the rest of the documentary without saying a word, except once at the end when she said, "The husband did it. He always does it." She left at 11:30. He did not ask her to stay. She did not offer. The next Friday she knocked again at 9:15. This time she brought 2 glasses. By month 6, she just knocked once, and he opened the door before she could finish. He told himself it was just routine. She was just a neighbor. This was just convenience. But here is what Solomon Reeves was not saying, even inside his own mind. He noticed everything. He noticed that she always sat on the left side of the couch, always, and that when something surprised her in a show, she pulled her feet up underneath her without realizing she did it. He noticed that she chewed on the arm of her glasses when she was thinking, and that when she laughed, really laughed, not the polished professional version she deployed in social settings, but the actual one, it was slightly too loud for her own dignity, and she always looked mildly embarrassed afterward, like a judge who had dropped a gavel. He noticed that she smelled like something warm and specific that he could never quite name, and that he had stopped trying because naming it felt like a line he was not ready to cross. He noticed that she looked at him sometimes just for a second, just a moment, like she was reading a case file she hadn't been given full access to, like there was something she was working out, like she was building an argument she hadn't decided whether to deliver yet. He did not ask about the look. She did not explain it. They watched television. He called it nothing. His colleague, Dr. Priya Okonkwo, infectious disease. 4th floor relentlessly perceptive human being, had been the first person to say anything directly. It was a Tuesday in January. They were eating lunch in the hospital cafeteria, and Solomon had mentioned casually offhandedly that his neighbor had recommended a restaurant in East Nashville that turned out to be excellent. Priya had put down her fork. "Your neighbor," she said. "Yes." "The lawyer?" "Yes. The same neighbor you told me about when her TV was broken." "Sure." "And when she needed medicine for her flight to D.C. "She asked me a medical question. I answered it. And you drove her to the airport at 4 a.m. because she would have had to take a rideshare. Priya, it's 4 a.m. Priya picked her fork back up, took a bite, looked at him across the table like she was delivering a diagnosis of her own. "Solomon," she said, "don't." "I haven't said anything." "You're about to." "All I was going to say," Priya said very carefully, "is that it's been 3 years since the divorce. And you deserve to eat your lunch," Solomon said. She did. But she smiled while she did it, and that was somehow worse. The divorce had not been ugly. That was the thing about it that still got Solomon sometimes the fact that it hadn't been a war. He and his ex-wife Ranata had simply run out of the thing that holds two people together when everything else gets difficult. Not love exactly. Something beneath love. Something more structural. She had wanted him to be more present. He had wanted to be present and simply not known how. They had tried counseling. They had tried vacations. They had tried the slow, exhausting work of two intelligent people attempting to fix something neither of them fully understood. In the end, Ranata had looked at him across their kitchen table and said, "You are a good man, Solomon. I just don't think you know how to stay." He had wanted to argue with her. He hadn't been able to. Miles had been 6 when the papers were signed. Now he was 9, full of opinions about basketball and superheroes and whatever new thing had come through his classroom that week. He spent every other weekend in apartment 4A, sleeping in the converted second bedroom that Solomon had painted dark blue because Miles said it looked like space. And on those weekends, Celeste would sometimes hear Miles in the hallway and open her door and say, "Hey kid, how's the 4th grade treating you?" And Miles would say with absolute devastating sincerity, "Ms. Celeste, do you know any good lawyer jokes?" And Celeste would say, "I know all of them. They're not jokes, they're cries for help." And Miles would laugh like that was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. And then he'd look at his father like, "Dad, she's so cool." And Solomon would look at Celeste over his son's head and see the smallest, most unguarded smile she ever allowed herself. He called it nothing. He was a fool. Marriage. The wedding invitation had come from Dr. James Osei, a cardiologist who worked 2 floors above Solomon and who had been telling anyone who would listen for 11 months that he was getting married and that it was going to be the event of the decade in Nashville minimum. Solomon had planned to go alone. He always went to these things alone. He was good at it. The socially capable divorced man, the colleague who made pleasant conversation and left at a reasonable hour, and went home to an apartment that was quiet, in the particular way that spaces are quiet when they've grown too accustomed to one person. He had been in the elevator fully dressed when the doors opened on the 4th floor and Celeste stepped in. She was wearing a deep burgundy dress, the kind that made no loud announcement, but simply existed and demanded you notice it anyway. Her hair was up. She was adjusting an earring with one hand and holding a small clutch with the other, and she did not look at him immediately because she was focused on the earring. Then she looked up. They were both silent for precisely 4 seconds. Solomon said, "Osei's wedding." She said, "He personally texted me 17 times about the seating arrangement." He texted me 12. I apparently needed to be reminded more urgently. The elevator reached the lobby. They walked out together and neither of them said the obvious thing that they were going to the same wedding alone, which was both natural and somehow enormous. And they got into the same rideshare because it simply made sense. And they rode 12 minutes through Nashville without speaking too much, but with the comfortable silence of 2 people who had spent enough evenings together that silence had stopped being something to fill. Solomon noticed at a red light that she smelled like that thing he could never name. He looked out the window. He said nothing. The reception was loud and beautiful and full of exactly the kind of people who attend cardiologists' weddings in Nashville, well-dressed, educated, emotionally enthusiastic about the open bar. Solomon and Celeste had been seated at a table with 2 other couples, both married, both friendly, both with the easy warmth of people who were comfortable inside their own shared lives. It had been going well. It had been fine. Solomon had been doing what he was good at, present, pleasant, contained. And then Gerald, the man to his left, a real estate attorney with the sociability of someone who had been at this open bar since before the ceremony, leaned across the table with a grin and said, "So how long have you 2 been together?" Solomon had opened his mouth to say, "We're neighbors." What came out instead was, "She's my wife." He didn't plan it. He didn't decide it. It simply came out the way certain truths do, when a person's guard is down and something beneath the surface decides it has waited long enough. The table laughed. Gerald raised his glass. "Beautiful couple." And Solomon laughed too, a quick deflecting "it's just a joke" kind of laugh, and he turned to look at Celeste, expecting her to roll her eyes or deliver some precise dry correction that would set the record comfortably straight. She was not rolling her eyes. She was looking at him. Just looking. With an expression he had never seen on her face before, not in 27 months of borrowed Tylenol and Thursday coffee and 200 Friday nights on his couch. An expression that wasn't amusement, and wasn't offense, and wasn't the professional courtroom composure she wore like second skin. It was something raw, something unguarded, something that looked terrifyingly like longing. And then she dropped her eyes to the table, and quietly, so quietly that he almost wasn't sure he'd heard it right, so quietly that Gerald was already talking about something else, and the rest of the table was already moved on. She said, "I wish you meant that." Solomon did not respond. He could not. He picked up his glass. He took a drink. He laughed at something Gerald said next without registering what it was. He was functional on the surface, a man at a wedding reception, perfectly normal. And underneath something was happening that he did not have the clinical language to describe, which was itself alarming because Solomon Reeves had clinical language for everything. She had said it so quietly, like she hadn't meant for him to hear it. Or worse, like she had meant for him to hear it and then immediately wished she could take it back. He spent the rest of the reception being exactly who he always was on the outside. He danced once with Priya, who had apparently also been invited, and who caught his eye across the room with an expression that said, "I see you, and we will be talking about this later." He congratulated James. He had the salmon. And the entire time, 4 words sat in his chest, like a weight that couldn't be moved. "I wish you meant that." In the rideshare home, Celeste sat on the far side of the seat. Not dramatically, not with any visible tension, just further than she usually sat, with her clutch in her lap and her eyes on the city moving past the window, and a silence that was nothing like the comfortable kind they'd built over 2 years of quiet Friday evenings. This silence had texture. It had heat. Solomon said about halfway home, "It was just a joke." Celeste said without turning from the window, "I know. I don't know why I said it." "It's fine, Solomon. It's fine." A pause. Precise. Final. "I'm tired. It was a long week." He let it go. They reached the Carver building. They rode the elevator in silence. They stopped in the hallway between 4A and 4B. And for a moment, just a moment, Celeste looked at him with that same expression from the table, the one he didn't have a name for, the one that felt like something being confessed without words. Then she said, "Good night, Solomon." She went inside. He heard the deadbolt click. He stood in the hallway for a long time. He was a doctor. He knew how to diagnose. He knew how to identify a symptom, trace it to its source, and prescribe accordingly. He had spent 15 years being precise and careful and correct. And standing in that hallway at 11:47 p.m., Solomon Reeves finally admitted, not fully, not comfortably, but undeniably, that for 27 months he had been looking at something real and calling it nothing. And he had no idea what to do with that, because the prescription this time was not something he could find in any textbook he had ever read. He turned off the light in apartment 4A. Across the wall, he heard her television come on. Same as every Friday. And somehow, everything was different. He did not sleep that night. That was the first sign, and Solomon knew it, because Solomon Reeves slept the way he did everything else, with discipline, with intention, with the kind of controlled routine that had kept him functional through a residency, a marriage, a divorce, and 3 years of rebuilding a life that made sense on paper, even when it didn't always make sense inside his chest. He was in bed by 11:30 on non-call nights. He was asleep within 15 minutes. This was not a gift. It was a practice the same way running 4 miles every other morning was a practice, the same way keeping Miles's room ready, even on the weeks he wasn't there, was a practice. Solomon did not leave things to chance if he could organize them instead. But that Saturday morning at 3 a.m., he was sitting on his couch in the dark, still in his dress shirt, just the top button open. Now, jacket thrown over the armchair, and he was staring at the wall that separated apartment 4A from apartment 4B, and he was thinking about 4 words that a woman had said under her breath at a wedding reception, like she hadn't meant to say them at all. "I wish you meant that." He had replayed it probably 40 times by then, and each time it replayed it changed slightly, not the words, but the weight of them. The first few times he'd tried to file it away as embarrassment. She'd been caught off guard by the joke. She'd said something she hadn't thought through. It was a reaction, not a declaration. People said things at weddings that they wouldn't say on a Tuesday. By the 15th replay, that argument had stopped working. Because he knew Celeste Navarro. He had spent 27 months learning her the way you learn something you haven't admitted you're studying. And one of the clearest things he knew about her, one of the most defining, was that Celeste did not say things she did not mean. She did not produce language carelessly. She had been trained professionally and by temperament to understand that words had consequences, that sentences were binding, that what came out of your mouth could become the thing a room full of people remembered long after you left. She had said it quietly, almost privately, like it had slipped out through a crack in something she kept very carefully sealed. And that specificity, that smallness of it, was what kept him on the couch at 3 a.m., with his dress shirt still on, and the city quiet outside, and the wall between them feeling like the most significant 12 inches of drywall in the state of Tennessee. He finally went to bed at 4:17. He lay there and listened to his own apartment being silent. He did not hear anything from 4B, because of course he didn't. She would have been asleep hours ago. She would have organized her feelings into a case file and closed the drawer and gone to sleep with the same efficiency she brought to everything. That was who she was. He told himself that, and almost believed it. He was asleep by 4:40. He dreamed about nothing he could remember. The next 3 days were strange, in a way that had no visible surface. From the outside, Solomon's life looked identical to what it always looked like. He worked. He did rounds. He reviewed charts and answered questions from residents, and ate lunch in the cafeteria, and drank bad hospital coffee, and kept his voice level, and his face professional, and his hands steady, which was the job, which was what he had been doing for 15 years. But inside, underneath the clinical exterior that had served him so reliably, something had shifted in a way he couldn't quite locate or correct, like a joint slightly out of alignment, like a reading that was off by a number that seemed small, but implied something larger. He caught himself thinking about her in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon while reviewing a patient's imaging results. Not a long thought, just to flash the image of her face at the reception table, that unguarded expression, the way she had dropped her eyes immediately after, like she'd shown him something she hadn't meant to show. He blinked. He refocused. He looked at the imaging. He thought about it again 2 hours later in the elevator. By Wednesday morning, he had stopped pretending he wasn't thinking about it, and had started instead thinking about it deliberately, trying to approach it the way he approached a difficult case. Systematically, with the intention of arriving at a conclusion he could act on. The problem was that every time he got close to a conclusion, it scared him enough that he found a reason to step back. He told himself that was wisdom. He was starting to suspect it was something else. Priya found him on Wednesday afternoon sitting in the break room with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched, staring at the middle distance with an expression she described later as the face of a man who is actively refusing to understand something obvious. She sat down across from him. She did not say anything for a moment. This was one of the things Solomon respected about Priya. She understood the value of silence, which was rarer than people thought. Then she said, "You want to tell me what happened at the wedding?" "Nothing happened at the wedding." Solomon. "I told you, Priya. I watched you for 45 minutes after whatever happened at that table," she said, "and you looked like someone had handed you a diagnosis you didn't know how to deliver, which for you is saying something." She wrapped both hands around her own coffee cup. "So, what happened?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he told her. Not all of it. Not the 3 a.m. couch sitting. Not the 40 replays, but the essential facts. The joke. The words. The ride home. Priya listened without interrupting, which was also rare, and which meant she understood this was not a casual conversation. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I wish you meant that. Yes. And you said, nothing. I laughed it off at the table. In the car I said it was just a joke. And she said she knew. Priya looked at him steadily. Solomon, do you understand what she was telling you? She was caught off guard. She said something impulsive. She said something true, Priya said. And then she immediately tried to protect herself from having said it because you laughed, and because she's Celeste, and because she would rather lose a case than lose her dignity. She paused. And you let her. He didn't answer. What do you actually feel? Priya asked. Not what do you think. Not what does it mean clinically or logically. What do you feel? Solomon picked up the coffee cup he hadn't touched, put it back down, looked at the table. I don't know, he said. Priya was quiet for a second. Then, I think you do know. I think you've known for a while. I think that's why you're sitting in here staring at nothing on a Wednesday afternoon instead of going home. He didn't argue with her. That in itself was an answer. He went home. He stood in the hallway between 4A and 4B for a moment, just a moment, and he looked at her door, light under it. She was home. He could hear faintly what sounded like papers being moved. She was working. Of course she was working. He went into his apartment. He made dinner. He ate it. He watched 30 minutes of something on television and retained nothing. At 9:15, their time, the time she usually knocked, the time that had been theirs for almost 2 years now, he sat very still and listened. Silence. She didn't knock. He told himself she was just busy, that it didn't mean anything, that 1 week of not watching television together was not significant in any narrative sense. He watched the rest of the show alone. At 11, he turned off the television. Through the wall, he heard hers come on. The following Friday came and went the same way. No knock. He heard her come home at 7:22, the heels on hardwood, the 3-second pause, the television. The sequence he knew by memory. The sequence that was still happening on her side of the wall, exactly the same. Just not the part that included him. He lasted until Saturday morning. He made 2 cups of coffee, force of habit or something more. He wasn't going to examine it. And he walked across the hall and knocked on 4B. There was a pause. Then the sound of her crossing the room. Then the door opened. She was in the oversized law school sweatshirt. Her hair was down. She had a pen tucked behind one ear, which meant she'd been working since early, which was consistent with who she was, and consistent with everything he knew about her. She looked at him. Then she looked at the 2 cups of coffee. A beat. Your machine is working fine, she said. I know. She didn't move. He didn't move. The coffee was getting slightly less hot by the second, and neither of them acknowledged it. I owe you an apology, she said finally. That was not what he had expected her to say. He had prepared loosely for several different versions of this conversation, and in none of them had she opened with that. You don't, he said. I said something at the reception that was Celeste, out of place, and it made things strange between us, and I don't want things to be strange between us. So, Celeste. He said her name again, not sharply, not to cut her off, just to make her stop moving through the prepared argument, long enough to be in the actual moment. You don't owe me an apology. She stopped, looked at him. Then what do you want, Solomon? He handed her the coffee. She took it. Can I come in? He asked. Another beat, shorter this time. She stepped back from the door. Her apartment was the mirror image of his same layout, opposite orientation, and it was predictably organized, with the kind of precision that revealed character. Files stacked in a system that looked random, but was clearly not. Books on the shelf arranged by subject, not alphabetically, which told you she thought about use, not aesthetics. One photograph on the wall, Her and a woman who shared her jawline, probably her mother and nothing else decorative, except a single painting above the couch that was abstract enough to mean anything, and specific enough that it had clearly meant something when she chose it. He had been in here maybe a dozen times over 2 years, always briefly, never long enough to look around really. He sat on the couch. She sat in the chair across from it, not the couch, which told him something, with her coffee in both hands. "I've been thinking," he said. "That's a medically appropriate activity." "About what you said." She looked at her coffee cup. "I want you to know," he said carefully, "that the reason I laughed at the table, it wasn't because it was funny. It was because I didn't know what else to do." She was very still. "I've been thinking about why I said it in the first place," he continued. "The joke. I've been thinking about what made me say it, and I keep getting to the same. I keep landing in the same place, and I don't know what to do with it." "What place?" she asked quietly. He looked at her. That it didn't feel like a joke when it came out. The room was absolutely silent. Celeste put her coffee cup on the table beside her. She was sitting with her back very straight, the courtroom posture, the one she defaulted to when she was managing something. He recognized it now. He recognized it as what it was. "Solomon," she said, "I know. We've built something. I know. That works. That functions. That doesn't need to be. Celeste." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, looked at her directly. "Does it actually not need to be? Or have we just been saying that because it was easier than the alternative?" She opened her mouth, closed it. He had never seen Celeste Navarro not immediately have a response. Even when the response was silence, it was a chosen, deliberate silence. What he was seeing right now was something different, was something closer to what he'd seen at the reception table. That expression, he didn't have a name for the one that looked like the inside of something she kept locked. "I'm not good at this," she said finally. The words came out quieter than she probably intended. "I want to be transparent about that up front." "Neither am I. You've been hurt. So have you." "I don't—" She stopped, pressed her lips together, tried again. "I don't want to be something that happens to your life and then leaves a mark. You have miles, you have structure, you have something that's finally stable. I don't want to be the thing that—" "You're already part of my structure," Solomon said. "That's what I'm trying to tell you. You've been part of it for 2 years, Celeste. I just spent 2 years calling it something smaller than what it is." She looked at him for a long time, and he sat there and let her look, because he understood finally what she was doing. She was building the case. She was examining the evidence. She was doing what she always did, trying to find the flaw in the argument, the weakness in the position, the place where the whole thing could come apart under cross-examination. And he waited, because he thought maybe just this once the case would hold. "I said something real," she said, "at the table. I know. I didn't plan it. I know that too. And I spent the whole ride home wishing I could unsay it, because you laughed and I thought—" She stopped. Something moved across her face. "I thought it landed the wrong way." "It didn't land wrong," he said. "It landed exactly right. I just didn't know how to respond to it in a moving vehicle at 11 p.m. Something happened at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. Something smaller and more complicated. "That is a very specific excuse," she said. "I'm a specific person." The tension in her shoulders shifted, not gone, but different. Not the courtroom posture anymore. Something with a little more room in it. "I don't know what we're doing," she said, honest, direct, the way she said things when she wasn't performing. "Me neither," he said. "But I think we should probably stop pretending we're doing nothing." She looked at him for another long moment. Then she picked up her coffee. "Okay," she said. Just that. Just okay. Not a declaration, not a verdict. Just the first word of something that hadn't been named yet, but had been alive for a very long time. What changed after that Saturday morning was not dramatic. Solomon had half expected something to shift dramatically the way it did in the movies Miles loved, where one conversation solved everything, and the music swelled, and the problem was resolved with the correct amount of feeling. Real life, he was relearning, did not work that way. What changed was smaller, more granular, and somehow more significant because of it. Friday nights came back. But they were different now, not in their structure, not in the comfort of them, but in what was underneath. He was aware of her differently. Not uncomfortably, not with the awkward self-consciousness of two people who had said too much and didn't know how to sit next to each other anymore, but with a kind of presence that hadn't been there before. Or that had been there, but unnamed. He noticed when she laughed and didn't try to stop noticing. He noticed when she looked at him from across the room and held the look instead of filing it away. And he could tell in the way you can tell the weather is changing before you can see the clouds, was doing the same. One Thursday morning he made coffee, and she came to get it, same as always. But when he handed her the cup, their hands were both on it for a second longer than necessary, and neither of them immediately moved, and she looked at him with those lawyer's eyes that saw everything, and she said, "You're different." "Different how?" "Lighter," she said. Like she was surprised by her own word. Like it had come out before she'd approved it. "You seem lighter." He considered that. "Maybe I put something down." She looked at him over the rim of the cup. "What did you put down?" "The pretending," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yeah," she said. "Me too." And she went back to her apartment, and he stood in his kitchen and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness exactly. Not yet. Something earlier than happiness. Something that comes before the feeling of a door being opened in a house you've lived in for years, in a room you told yourself wasn't there. Gyung, Miles noticed, before Solomon told him anything. That was the thing about 9-year-olds. The good ones, the observant ones. The ones who had grown up watching adults navigate complexity. They noticed more than you thought they did. And they named it in ways that made you feel mildly exposed. It was a Saturday, one of his weekends. Miles had knocked on Celeste's door because he wanted to ask her something about a book he was reading that had a lawyer character in it, and she had opened the door and spent 20 minutes explaining the actual mechanics of a criminal trial, in terms a 9-year-old could follow with the patience and precision she brought to everything she considered worth doing correctly. Afterward, Miles had come back to 4A and dropped onto the couch and looked at his father with his mother's eyes, direct, clear, slightly too perceptive, and said, "Dad, do you like Ms. Celeste?" Solomon did not look up from the magazine he wasn't reading. "Of course I do. She's a friend." "That's not what I mean." He put the magazine down. "Miles, it's okay if you do," Miles said with the easy confidence of a child who had already decided this was fine and was mostly just waiting for the adult to catch up. "She's nice. She's smart. She explained the whole voir dire thing to me." "Do you know what that is?" "I know what voir dire is. She says it's how lawyers figure out if a jury can be fair. She said it's like..." Miles tilted his head. "She said it's like how you know if you can trust someone. You ask them questions, and you listen to what they don't say." Solomon looked at his son. She said a lot of things. I took notes." Miles held up his arm where he had apparently written several words in pen because he hadn't had paper. "She also said that the best lawyers and the best doctors have the same problem." "What problem is that?" Miles looked at his notes. "They're very good at understanding everyone else's situation and very bad at diagnosing their own." He looked back up at his father. "I think she was talking about you, Dad." Solomon was quiet for a long moment. "She's very smart," he said. "I know," Miles said. "You should tell her that." He picked up his book and opened it to his page, done with the conversation the way children are done with conversations, completely immediately without ceremony. "Also, she said I can come ask her questions about the book whenever I want. So I'm probably going to do that." "Okay," Solomon said. He picked up his magazine. He did not read it. He thought about a woman across the hallway who had explained voir dire to his 9-year-old son, who had somehow, in the middle of a conversation about a children's book, delivered him a message she probably knew he would receive and probably knew she couldn't say directly. Very good at understanding everyone else's situation. Very bad at diagnosing their own. He thought about that for a long time. The following week, Celeste received an email. He knew this because she told him on a Wednesday evening door open between their apartments, in the casual, borderless way their evenings had started to operate her. Working at her dining table, him reading across the hall, the two spaces connected, as though the hallway between them was just a formality, and she told him not like it was a crisis, but like it was information she was still processing. "I got a job offer," she said. He put the book down. "What kind?" "Senior partner track, a firm in Chicago." She said it without looking up from her laptop. "Saltire and Webb. They reached out 6 months ago and I declined. They came back." "Why'd you decline the first time?" She was quiet for a moment. "I had things here. I wasn't ready to leave." He sat with that sentence. Let it be there without immediately responding to it. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking that it's a very good offer," she said carefully. "And that Chicago is 3.5 hours away, which is not the other side of the world, but is also not." She stopped. "I'm thinking about a lot of things." "When do you have to decide?" "They want an answer in 3 weeks." He nodded. "Okay." She finally looked up. "Okay. I mean..." He stopped, restarted, felt the old instinct rise up, the one that said, "Stay measured, stay rational, don't overclaim anything," and he felt it, and he recognized it, and he chose for the first time in a very long time to do something different with it. "No, not okay, I don't..." He paused. "I want to be honest with you. Please." "I don't want you to go," he said. The room was quiet. Celeste looked at him steadily from across the space between their apartments. Her laptop was still open in front of her. A city that wanted her was in her inbox, and she was looking at him with that expression he finally had a name for, finally after 27 months, the one that looked like longing, because it was longing, and the one that looked like fear, because it was that too, and underneath both of them was something quieter and more fundamental. It was the look of someone who had been waiting for a thing and was not yet sure even now that it was real. He said, "I know that's not a decision. I know that's just, I'm telling you what's true for me. And you should make the decision that's right for you. But you asked what I was thinking, and that's what I'm thinking." She nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. Thank you for saying that." "Celeste." "Yeah. I mean it." She held his gaze. Something shifted in her face, not resolving, not collapsing, but opening. Like a window being cracked in a room that's been closed too long. "I know," she said softly. "I know you do." And she went back to her laptop. And he went back to his book. And the space between their apartments felt like it contained something enormous, something that was still forming, still becoming, still not fully arrived, but that was unmistakably and irreversibly alive. Outside Nashville moved through the night the way it always did. The city had no opinion about any of this. It was just there the way cities are patient and indifferent and full of the private enormities of ordinary people. But inside apartment 4, a Solomon Reeves held his book and did not read it and listened to the particular sound of Celeste Navarro working in the apartment across the hall, and understood with a precision that surprised him that this specific sound, this specific feeling, this specific weight in his chest that he had spent 2 years calling nothing was not nothing, had never been nothing. He just hadn't been ready to carry what it actually was. He thought he might be ready now. He wasn't entirely sure, but for the first time in 3 years, the uncertainty didn't feel like danger. It felt like the beginning of something true. 3 weeks is not a long time. Solomon knew this clinically. He had delivered enough news in his career that required people to make enormous decisions inside impossible timelines. and he had learned that 3 weeks felt different depending on what was sitting inside them. 3 weeks waiting for test results was an eternity. 3 weeks before a surgery was gone before you blinked. 3 weeks before Celeste had to give Chicago her answer felt to Solomon like both at once. He did not bring it up again. He had said what he said. "I don't want you to go," and he had meant it and she had heard it, and he understood that repeating it would not make it more true, would only make it pressure, and pressure was not what this needed. What this needed was something he was still learning how to provide. Space, patience, the willingness to let another person arrive at their own conclusion without standing in the doorway of it. So he did not bring it up. But it was there, every Thursday morning when she came for coffee, every Friday evening when she knocked and he opened the door before she finished. Every time Miles called from his mother's house and said something that made Solomon laugh, and he looked across the room instinctively toward the wall, toward her side of it, like he expected her to have heard it too. It was there in all the spaces he hadn't known were shaped around her until he started imagining them without her in them. He did not bring it up. He thought about it constantly. Celeste, for her part, was doing what Celeste did with things that were difficult. She was working. Not avoidance exactly, or not only avoidance, but the particular kind of productivity that very driven people use to keep themselves from sitting still long enough to feel something fully. Solomon recognized it because he had done the same thing for 3 years after the divorce, buried himself in charts and rounds, and the clean, solvable problems of medicine, while the unsolvable personal ones sat in a corner and waited. She was at her firm until 8 and 9, and once on a Thursday past 10. He knew because the light under her door was dark when he got home from a late shift, which was unusual. He stood in the hallway for a moment, decided against knocking, went to bed. At 7:14 the next morning, she knocked on his door. She was already in her work clothes, fully assembled armor in place, briefcase in hand, but she had the look of someone who had been up earlier than made sense and had spent that extra time somewhere uncomfortable inside her own head. "I need to think out loud," she said. "You have 11 minutes before I have to leave." "Come in." She came in. She stood in his kitchen while he poured her a coffee she hadn't asked for but took automatically. She set her briefcase down. She put both hands around the cup. "Tell me the honest version," she said. "Not the supportive version, the honest one." He looked at her. Of what? "Of what you think I should do." She met his eyes. "About Chicago." He was quiet for a moment. "I told you what I feel. That's not the same as what I think you should do. I know the difference, Solomon. I'm asking for both." He leaned back against the counter, looked at her carefully. Thought about what Priya had said about him. "You're very good at understanding everyone else's situation, and very bad at diagnosing your own," and understood that the same sentence applied to the woman standing in his kitchen right now, which was maybe why they had found each other so naturally. Two people fluent in everyone's inner life except their own. "I think," he said slowly, "that Saltire and Webb is a significant opportunity, and that you've worked towards something like it your whole career. I think that if you turn it down and it never comes back, there will be a version of you years from now that wonders. And I don't want that for you." She nodded, listening carefully. "And the other part?" "The other part," he said, "is that I don't want you to go. And I recognize that's not a reason for you to stay, because what we are, what this is, doesn't have enough definition yet to ask you to make a decision that size. And I know that. He stopped. "I wanted you to know that the offer being in Chicago is not a neutral fact for me. That's all." She was quiet for a long moment. The coffee steamed between her hands. "You know what my problem is," she said finally. "I have some guesses." The corner of her mouth moved. "I've spent my entire career being the person who makes the hard call, who looks at the evidence and makes the decision that serves the long-term outcome, even when the short-term cost is significant. That's who I am professionally, and I thought it was who I was personally, too. But I am standing in your kitchen at 7:14 in the morning," she said, "and I cannot make this call. She looked at him. And I don't know if that's because the evidence is genuinely unclear or because I'm afraid of what I'm choosing between. What are you afraid of choosing between? He asked. She held his gaze. A life I built from nothing exactly the way I planned it, she said. And something I didn't plan at all. The kitchen was very quiet. He did not say anything because there was nothing to say that wouldn't be either too much or not enough. He just stood there and looked at her and let the words be there between them, solid and real, which was what they deserved. After a moment, she picked up her briefcase. 11 minutes, she said. I have to go. I know. At the door, she paused, turned back. Something in her face was different from the courtroom composure she'd arrived with, slightly undone, in a way that was not weakness, just honesty. Solomon. Yeah. Thank you, she said. For the honest version. Always, he said. She left. He stood in his kitchen for a while. Outside his window, Nashville was waking up. It was Priya again who said the thing he needed to hear. She said it on a Tuesday over the bad hospital coffee, their regular location, their regular timing. But this time, she had an expression he didn't see on her. Often, not the dry perceptiveness she usually deployed, but something more direct, more concerned. Can I tell you something as a friend and not as a colleague? She said. Those are usually the conversations I regret agreeing to. Solomon? Go ahead. She set down her cup. You are doing the thing again. He waited. You are standing at the edge of something real, she said. And instead of stepping forward, you are standing there being very reasonable and very thoughtful and very measured, and you are waiting for the perfect moment, or the perfect clarity, or the perfect set of circumstances that will make it feel safe to do the human thing. She looked at him. And I'm telling you, as someone who has watched you do this for 3 years, that the perfect moment is not coming. That's not how it works. That's not how any of it works. I told her I didn't want her to go. You told her you didn't want her to go, and then you immediately contextualized it into something smaller so she wouldn't feel pressured. Priya said it gently, but without softening the edges, which is kind, and is also, Solomon, a way of protecting yourself from fully committing to it. Because if you contextualize it and it doesn't work out, you didn't fully put it on the line. He looked at his coffee. When did you become the therapist? He said. I've always been a therapist. I'm just also an infectious disease doctor. She picked her cup back up. I'm not telling you to be reckless. I'm telling you that there is a version of being careful that becomes its own kind of harm. And you have been careful for so long about so many things that I'm not sure you can feel the difference anymore. He sat with that. She has 3 weeks, he said. I know. And I don't know what the right thing to say is. Yes, you do, Priya said. You just haven't decided if you're willing to say it yet. The second week arrived and moved through itself. On Wednesday, Miles called and asked if Ms. Celeste could come to his school presentation the following week. His class was doing something about careers, and he had asked her months ago if she would talk about being a lawyer, and she had said yes. Did you already ask her? Solomon said. I asked her last month. Miles said like this was obvious. She said she put it in her calendar. Dad, she uses a color-coded calendar. Did you know she does that? I did know that, actually. It's very organized. She showed me. You're in it. Solomon paused. What? She has a color for you. It's dark blue, same as your room color. Miles said this with the breezy certainty of a child who does not understand why this would be significant to an adult. Anyway, she said she'd come. I just wanted to make sure you knew. He thanked Miles. He hung up. He thought about a color-coded calendar with a category for him in it, and he sat with that piece of information in the quiet of his apartment for a long time. She came to Miles's school on a Thursday afternoon. Solomon went too, which Miles had somehow coordinated without appearing to coordinate anything. He had simply mentioned the time and location to both of them separately, with the casual precision of a child who had decided what the outcome should be and was working backward from there, Celeste stood in front of 22 fourth graders and explained what litigation meant in terms they could understand. She was different with them than she was in the courtroom or the hallway or his kitchen, not softer exactly, but more willing to be amusing. She answered their questions with complete seriousness, regardless of how far outside the topic they wandered, which they did frequently and without warning. "Can you send someone to jail?" one kid asked. "Prosecutors send people to jail. I defend people." "So you help bad guys?" "I help people make sure the system is fair. Sometimes my clients are innocent. Sometimes they made mistakes. Everyone deserves someone who makes sure the process is done right." "What if they're really bad? Then that's between them and the jury." "What's a jury?" 12 people who listen to all the evidence and decide what they believe is true. "How do you pick them?" "Very carefully," she said. "You ask them questions and you listen to what they don't say." Solomon, standing at the back of the room, heard her use the same phrase she had apparently used with Miles. You listen to what they don't say, and he understood in the specific way he was learning to understand things about Celeste Navarro that this was not a coincidence. She knew he was there. She knew he would hear it. She was in her way asking him to listen to what she wasn't saying. He listened. After the presentation, Miles ran off with his friends, and Solomon and Celeste walked out to the parking lot together. October had settled fully into Nashville now. Real cold, intentional cold, the kind that made you walk slightly faster and want something warm nearby. She had her coat buttoned. He was in his jacket. They walked side by side and their arms were close and neither of them moved away. "You were good with them," he said. "They were easier than most juries." Miles was very proud. She was quiet for a moment. "He's a remarkable kid. You know that." "I know. He sees things." She said it not quite casually, not quite as an aside. "He sees more than he lets on." "He told me you're in his color-coded calendar," Solomon said. She glanced at him. "He told you that?" "He also told me you have a color for me." A beat. "Dark blue," she said. "I know," he mentioned. "It was a practical decision," she said. "You have medical schedule changes that affect things." "Things," he repeated. "Scheduling things." "Right." He looked at her. "Celeste." Solomon. "Stop being a lawyer for 30 seconds." She took a breath, exhaled. The cold air made it visible, brief and real. "I don't know how to stop being a lawyer," she said. "It's not a profession. It's structural. It's how I think." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to stop thinking. I'm asking you to tell me what you actually feel, right now, walking in this parking lot." She looked ahead, took 3 more steps, then stopped. He stopped beside her. "I feel," she said carefully, "like I have spent a very long time building a life that was exactly what I planned. And that somewhere in the last 2 years, something happened that I didn't plan. And I don't know what to do with something I didn't plan, Solomon, because planning is how I stay safe. Planning is how I make sure things don't." She stopped, started again. "I don't have a good history with things I didn't plan." "Neither do I," he said. "Your marriage was something I planned very carefully," he said, "and it still fell apart. So I don't know that planning is the guarantee either of us thinks it is." She looked at him, right at him. And he could see her, really see her the way he'd been learning to, under the composure and the precision and the color-coded calendar and the courtroom armor, and what he saw was a woman who was genuinely deeply afraid. Not of him, not of the decision, but of wanting something this much. Of letting herself want it this much. "I know what I feel," she said. Quiet, honest. The real voice, not the professional one. "I've known for a while. That's not the hard part." "What's the hard part?" She looked at him. "The hard part," she said, "is that you've been hurt. And Miles has been through things. And this," she gestured between them, brief and almost helpless, "this is not a simple thing. If it goes wrong," "If it goes wrong," Solomon said, "it goes wrong. That's true. But we've already been building something for 2 years, Celeste. The risk isn't in starting. The risk was in the part we've already been doing. She absorbed that. I don't want to hurt you, she said. I know. Or Miles. I know that too. Or myself, she added. And it was the most vulnerable thing he had heard her say in 27 months, and he understood it cost her something to say it. I don't want any of that either, he said. But I also don't think we get to avoid risk by calling this nothing. I think we already gave up the safe option, a long time ago. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, I haven't given Chicago an answer yet. I know. I have 8 days. I know. I want you to know, she said, that what you said that you don't want me to go, I've been carrying that. I want you to know that it's part of what I'm thinking about. Just part, he said. Something moved through her eyes, something almost like a smile but deeper. Don't push it, doctor, she said. He felt something loosen in his chest. Just slightly, just enough. They walked back to their cars. They drove home separately, the way they always had through the Nashville evening. And when they reached the Carver building and rode the elevator up together, the silence between them was back to the comfortable kind, but different now. Fuller. Like a room that had been rearranged, the same furniture, but more space to move. 8 days. Solomon felt them the way you feel, a countdown you pretend you're not keeping. He worked. He did his rounds. He had Miles for the weekend, and they made dinner on Saturday. Miles insisted on attempting pancakes for dinner, which was a 9-year-old's idea of rebellion, and Solomon let him. And the kitchen was a minor disaster, and it was one of the better evenings he could remember. At one point, Miles looked up from his pancake batter and said, Dad, are you nervous about something? Solomon looked at his son. What makes you think that? You're stirring that too much. You always stir things too much when you're thinking about something else. He put the spoon down. I'm fine, he said. Okay, Miles said with the tone of someone who disagreed, but had decided to allow the fiction for now. Is it about Ms. Celeste? Miles, because she seemed kind of sad this week, he said. I saw her in the hallway on Friday and she smiled, but it was the thinking hard smile, not the regular one. I can tell the difference. Solomon was quiet for a moment. When did you become so observant? He said. I've always been observant, Miles said. You just don't always notice. He poured the batter onto the pan with considerable confidence and not enough precision. She's important, right? Like actually important. Not just neighbor important. He looked at his son. Yeah, he said. Actually important. Miles nodded like this confirmed something he had already decided. Then you should probably do something about it, Dad, before she leaves. She might not leave. But she might. Miles watched his pancake. You always tell me that waiting to say something hard doesn't make it easier. You told me that when I was scared to tell you I broke your watch. Solomon did not say anything for a moment. Then, I told you that. Yeah, in like 2nd grade. Miles flipped the pancake with genuine skill and evident pride. You were right, by the way. It was easier after I said it. He looked at his 9-year-old son, standing at the stove making dinner pancakes, casually delivering wisdom that landed with the precision of something Solomon had been circling for weeks. When did you get so smart? He asked. Miles shrugged. I had a good teacher. He glanced back. Also, Ms. Celeste explained voir dire to me, which is about listening to what people don't say, so I've been practicing. Solomon laughed. The real kind, not the professional managed version. The kind that came from somewhere lower and more genuine. And in the sound of it, he heard something he recognized. Relief. The day before Chicago's deadline, something happened that neither of them had planned for, which he was learning was how the important things tended to arrive. He got home late. A patient had taken a difficult turn, and the evening had extended itself without asking permission. He was tired in the specific way that medicine tired you, not just physically, but existentially, that heaviness that came from sitting at the edge of someone else's crisis and pouring steadiness into it until they were stable. He was standing at his door key in hand when he heard her door open. She had been waiting. He understood that immediately, not from anything dramatic, just from the fact that she was in the hallway, and it was 10:47 p.m., and the light was on behind her, and her arms were crossed in the way she crossed them when she had been sitting with something for a long time, and it had become weight. "I made a decision," she said. He stood very still. The hallway between them was 11 feet the same. 11 feet it had always been, and it felt simultaneously like nothing at all, and like the longest distance he had ever tried to cross. "Okay," he said carefully. She looked at him. And there it was again, that expression he had finally named that looked like longing and fear and courage all at the same time, the one that had been building since a wedding reception, and 4 words whispered at a table and a ride home that changed the shape of everything. "I called them this afternoon," she said. "Saltire and Webb." He waited. He breathed. "I told them no," she said. The hallway was absolutely quiet. "Celeste, I want you to hear me out," she said, "because I need you to understand that this wasn't. I didn't say no because you told me you didn't want me to go. I said no because I sat down and I looked at the evidence the way I would look at any case, and I asked myself what I was actually choosing between, and—" She stopped, took a breath. "I've been building a life here, not just a career. A life. And somewhere in the last 2 years the life got—" She paused. "You're part of it, Solomon. Miles is part of it. Thursday morning coffee and Friday night television and the specific way this hallway smells in the winter and—" She stopped herself. "I'm not good at this." "You're doing fine," he said. "I'm really not." But there was something almost like humor in it. "The point is, I said no. Not because of you. And also because of you. And I need you to know both of those things are true at the same time." He moved. Not a big movement, 3 steps across half the hallway, and he stopped just in front of her, close enough that the space between them was now something deliberate, something chosen. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes. The night at the reception." He held her gaze. "When you said what you said." She didn't look away. "Yeah." "Did you mean it?" Something moved through her face. Something that took down a wall she had been building for a very long time, carefully brick by brick, with the same precision she brought to everything. "Yes," she said, simply, fully. "Yes, I meant it." He nodded slowly. "I'm glad," he said. "Solomon, I'm glad," he said again, "because I meant it too. I didn't say it to be funny. I said it because somewhere under all the careful, reasonable, logical distance I'd been keeping somewhere under all of that, it was already true. And I've spent months figuring out if I was willing to admit that." She was very still. "Are you?" she asked. "Willing?" He looked at her, really looked. At the woman who had walked into his lobby with a sprained wrist and a phone call, she was winning, and a way of moving through the world that had rearranged something in him he hadn't known needed rearranging. "Yeah," he said. "I am." Something in her shoulders released, the smallest movement. But he saw it. And in the hallway of the Carver building between apartment 4A and apartment 4B on a late October night in Nashville, nothing dramatic happened. They stood there in the space between their doors, and it was enough. For now, it was exactly enough. But both of them knew, and neither of them said it yet, because some things needed to be lived into slowly, that the easy part was over. The real work was just beginning. The real work Solomon was discovering looked nothing like what he had expected. He had expected in the vague, unexamined way that people expect things they haven't thought through carefully, that once the words were said, once the admission was made, once 2 people standing in a hallway acknowledged that what existed between them was real and had been real for a long time, the difficult part would be over. That clarity would follow naturally. That the feeling of relief he'd had in that hallway would expand into something steady and uncomplicated. He was a doctor. He understood the mechanics of most things. He did not understand why he had expected this to be simple. Because the real work he was finding was not in the saying. It was in the staying. It was in the daily, unglamorous, ordinary practice of choosing someone not in a grand moment, not in a hallway with the right words and the right light, and the accumulated weight of 27 months behind you, but on a Tuesday when you were tired and short-tempered and had nothing left to give, and they needed something anyway. It was in the learning, and Solomon Reeves, who had spent 3 years being certain he understood exactly what he was capable of and exactly where his limits were, was beginning to understand that he had significantly underestimated both. November arrived with the particular bluntness of a Nashville winter that had stopped apologizing for itself. Cold constant without the dramatic flair of somewhere that got real snow, but with enough gray persistence to make you feel it. Solomon ran his 4 miles on the mornings he could manage. It came back to the building, breathing visible air, and twice now had found Celeste in the lobby, already leaving fully assembled coffee in hand, moving with the forward momentum of a woman who had somewhere important to be, and they had stood there for 30 seconds in the lobby exchanging the particular kind of look that people exchange when they are still learning the new version of something they thought they already knew. It was not uncomfortable. It was just new. And new things had a texture to them, a slight resistance, a slight self-consciousness that Solomon recognized as the friction of adjustment rather than the friction of wrongness. He held that distinction carefully, the way you hold a diagnosis that requires monitoring rather than immediate intervention. The mornings were good. The evenings were mostly good. It was the middle spaces, the unexpected moments, the unscripted ones, where they were both still finding their footing. On a Thursday, he said something during their morning coffee that came out sharper than he intended. He had been running late. His mind was already on a patient he was worried about. And when she mentioned something about his schedule in passing, something small, practical, nothing significant, he said more curtly than was warranted. "I know my own schedule, Celeste." She did not react. She took her coffee. She said evenly, "I know you do." And she left. He spent the next 3 hours understanding exactly how wrong he had been, and exactly what that tone had sounded like. And by the time lunch came, he was already composing the apology in his head with the thoroughness he brought to a case presentation. Clear, specific, no deflection, no rationalization. He texted her at 12:15. "I was short with you this morning. That was about me, not you." "I'm sorry." She responded at 12:47. "I know. Thank you for saying it." And then after a pause, "How's the patient?" He stared at the text for a moment. The question was so precise, so exactly the right thing. She had known without him saying it that the sharpness had come from somewhere else, from worry he hadn't named, and she had gone straight to the source of it instead of staying in the surface wound. He texted back, stable. "Better than this morning." She sent back, "Good. I'll bring dinner tonight. Don't argue." He texted, "I won't argue." And he didn't. She brought dinner. They ate it in his kitchen, real food from the Thai place 3 blocks away, that she had been recommending for 6 months before he'd finally gone. They sat across from each other and ate and talked about his patient and her deposition, and Miles's upcoming school play, in which Miles had apparently been cast as a tree, a role Miles described to Solomon with the dramatic gravity of someone playing Hamlet. It was not a romantic evening. It was a Tuesday. It was ordinary. And it was, Solomon realized, somewhere around the middle of it, exactly what he had been missing for 3 years. Not the grand version of intimacy, but this specific texture. The comfortable ordinariness of 2 people inside each other's lives, not performing, not managing, just present. He washed the dishes. She dried them. They did not discuss that this was what they were doing or what it meant that it felt natural. They just did it. The first real difficulty came from a direction Solomon hadn't fully prepared for, which was, he supposed, consistent with how difficulties operated. It came from Ranata. Miles's mother was not and had never been an unreasonable person. She and Solomon had built a functional co-parenting arrangement with the kind of determined professionalism that 2 intelligent, well-meaning people construct when they have agreed that the child's stability is more important than either of their feelings. They communicated clearly. They were consistent. They did not weaponize Miles, which was the baseline requirement, and the thing Solomon was most proud of in the wreckage of what hadn't worked. But Ranata was also a perceptive person, and she was Miles's mother, and when Miles came home from a weekend at Solomon's apartment, talking about Ms. Celeste with the casual frequency and specificity that indicated someone had moved from neighbor to present adult figure in my son's life, she called. "I want to talk to you about something," she said. The tone was not hostile, but it was careful in the specific way that careful people are careful when they are managing something they haven't decided how to feel about yet. "Okay," he said. "Miles talks about Celeste a lot." "I know. More than a lot. She came to his school presentation. She watches shows with him when he's there on weekends, apparently. He has opinions about her color-coded calendar. He told me she's your—" Ranata stopped. "He said she's important. Actually, important." His words. Solomon was quiet for a moment. "He said that to me too." "Is he right?" He thought about the question. Not about the answer he knew the answer, but about how to say it in a way that was honest and also fair to what Ranata was actually asking, which was not just, "Is she important?" but "Is my son going to be okay? And did you think about what this means for him, and am I going to have to adjust something I've built?" "Yes," he said. "He's right." Ranata was quiet for a moment. "How long?" It's recent, in the sense of us acknowledging it. But she's been in our lives for 2 years, Ranata. She's not new to Miles. She's been consistent. She's not someone who appeared and is going to disappear. You can't promise that. No, he said. I can't promise anything. But I want you to know that I thought about Miles first. I always do. Another silence. Then, is she good? He understood what she was asking. Not is she accomplished or is she successful, but the deeper question, the one that only made sense from a mother who was trying to protect her son from the particular kind of harm that comes from watching an adult leave. She's one of the most genuine people I've met, he said. And she's good with him. She takes him seriously. She doesn't perform for him, she's present with him, honestly. Ranata was quiet for what felt like a long time. Okay, she said finally. Okay. I'm not saying I don't have feelings about this, she said. That would be dishonest. But I'm also not going to make this harder than it needs to be. Miles is happy. He talks about her the way he talks about things that are good for him. That matters more than my feelings. A pause. But Solomon. Yeah. If this goes sideways. I know, he said. He'll need... I know, Ranata. I know. He said it gently. I'm not doing this carelessly. I promise you I'm not. She seemed to accept that. They said goodnight with the slightly formal warmth of their arrangement, not close, not distant. Calibrated precisely to what they actually were to each other, which was people who had loved the same person and built something important from the material of what remained. After he hung up, Solomon sat for a while. Then he went and knocked on 4B. She opened the door, read his face immediately. What happened? Ranata called. Celeste absorbed this. About me. About Miles. About you being in his life. He leaned against the doorframe. She wasn't cruel about it. She's being reasonable. She just needed to know. What did you tell her? The truth, he said. That you're important, that you're consistent, that you take Miles seriously. Celeste looked at him. And that I'm not doing this carelessly. Something moved through her face. The softer version, the one she allowed in the late evenings, the one that wasn't managed. Are you okay? Yeah. He thought about it. It made it real in a different way. Made me think about what it means that there are other people in this. Not just us. She nodded slowly. Miles isn't a complication, Solomon. He's part of the picture. I want you to know I understand that. I know you do. I don't approach him like a detail to manage. She paused. He's remarkable. I said that before and I meant it. He sees things most adults don't see. He told me you talk to him like he's a person. He is a person. A lot of adults forget that with kids. She looked at him steadily. I don't forget it. And I'm not going to suddenly become someone who does. He held her gaze. I know, he said. And he did. That was the thing he did know. Because he had been watching her for 27 months and paying attention, even when he called it nothing. And what he knew about Celeste Navarro was that she did not do anything by half. She did not give partial attention or conditional presence. When she was in something, she was in it with the full weight of who she was. That was terrifying, and it was also he was realizing exactly what he had been looking for without knowing he was looking. Priya's response to the update was characteristically efficient. So she turned down Chicago, she said. You admitted you meant it. You apologized for being short with her on a Thursday, and she brought you dinner. Ranata called and it was uncomfortable and you handled it. Am I missing anything? That's a functional summary, Solomon said. And you're still sitting here looking like a man who's waiting for the other shoe to drop. He looked at her. Is it that obvious? Solomon, I have known you for 7 years. I watched you do 3 years of controlled solitary everything is fine, and I have it together. I can read your face. She tilted her head. What are you actually afraid of? He turned the coffee cup in his hands. That I haven't changed enough, he said. Priya was quiet, listening properly. Ranata told me at the end when we were filing the papers, she said I was a good man, but that I didn't know how to stay, and I've thought about that a lot. I've thought about it more than she probably knows. He put the cup down. And I want to believe I'm different now. I want to believe 3 years of whatever this was, of being alone and figuring out what I actually want, I want to believe that changed something. But what if it didn't? What if I get into this really into it and I do the same thing? I get careful. I get distant. I manage instead of feeling. Priya looked at him for a long moment. Can I tell you something, she said. You're going to regardless. The fact that you're asking that question, she said, is evidence that you're different. The Solomon who didn't know how to stay wasn't sitting in a break room terrified of repeating his mistakes. He wasn't asking whether he had changed enough. He thought he was doing everything right. She let that land. The version of you who is genuinely afraid of hurting someone, that version is the one who won't. He sat with that. That's not a guarantee, he said. No, she agreed. Nothing is. But it's something. It's actually something. She picked up her coffee. You've been treating this like a condition you need to cure before you're allowed to participate in your own life. You don't get to be cured first, Solomon. You get to be human while you're healing. That's how it works. He was quiet for a while. When did you get so wise? He said. I was always this wise, she said. You were just too busy being reasonable to listen. December came. Miles's school play happened on a Friday evening, and Solomon and Celeste sat side by side in the second row of the school auditorium, surrounded by parents and grandparents and younger siblings who couldn't sit still and watched Miles perform the role of an oak tree with a commitment and physical presence that suggested he had taken the assignment significantly more seriously than any tree in theatrical history had been taken before. He had 3 lines. He delivered all 3 with the solemnity of someone who understood he was doing important work. Solomon felt the laugh building and pressed his mouth together, trying to contain it. Beside him, Celeste leaned over and said quietly directly into his ear, He's absolutely not going to let any of us forget this performance. He lost the battle with the laugh. Kept it quiet, but felt it in his chest, the full, real kind. She was smiling, the actual smile, the one that was slightly too wide for her public dignity, and that she still looked briefly self-conscious about. She was smiling and watching Miles be an oak tree, with the focused attention of someone who genuinely wanted to be there, not someone who had shown up out of obligation. Afterward, in the parking lot, Miles came running out in his costume, still a brown and green arrangement that involved a remarkable amount of felt, and went directly to Celeste and said, Did you see the arm part? I worked on the arm part specifically. The arm part was the strongest moment of the entire production, she said completely seriously. Miles looked at his father. She gets it. She does, Solomon agreed. Miss Celeste, I have a question. Miles stood with the confidence of someone who had decided this was the right moment for a question he had been holding. Are you and my dad like... He made a gesture with his felt-covered arm that managed to be somehow both vague and entirely precise. You know? Solomon opened his mouth. Celeste spoke first. She crouched slightly, not down to Miles's level condescendingly, but enough to meet him more directly, and she said, What do you think we are? Miles considered this. I think you're important to each other, he said. Actually important. Like I told my dad. You told him that? And you. Miles nodded. I told both of you, sort of. You just weren't in the same room. Celeste looked at Solomon over Miles's head. The expression on her face was something Solomon was still adding vocabulary for this specific version of her, the one that appeared when something caught her genuinely off guard, and she didn't have time to manage it first. She looked back at Miles. Yeah, she said. Actually important. That's a good way to put it. Miles accepted this with the equanimity of someone whose theory had been confirmed. Okay. Can we get pancakes? I want dinner pancakes. You can have whatever you want, Solomon said. You just performed a feat of theatrical oak tree work. I know, Miles said. They got pancakes. All three of them in a booth in a diner 2 miles from the school. Miles still partially in his costume because he had refused to fully remove it, and Solomon across from Celeste and Miles between them in the literal sense. And also Solomon understood, in the more important sense, the living, breathing 9-year-old embodiment of what was actually at stake here, what was actually being built. Miles fell asleep in the back of the car on the way home. Deeply immediately, with the abandon of a child who had given everything he had to an oak tree performance and had nothing left. Solomon glanced back at him, then at Celeste in the passenger seat. Thank you, he said quietly, for tonight. I wanted to be there. I know. He looked back at the road. He's going to remember this. He catalogs things, stores them. Good things too, she asked. Especially good things. She was quiet for a moment. I want to be a good thing he stores, she said. Quietly, honestly, without the armor. He reached across the center console, found her hand. She turned her palm up and held his without commentary, without making it into something it needed to be analyzed. Just held it. They drove the rest of the way home like that. Miles slept in the back. Nashville moved around them. It was in mid-December that the conversation happened. The real one, not the hallway admission, not the parking lot, honesty, not the accumulated Tuesday evenings and Thursday mornings, but the conversation that went deeper than any of those, the one that neither of them had planned, and that arrived the way the necessary things always seemed to arrive in an ordinary moment without announcement. They were in his apartment. Late. Miles was at Ranata's. The television was on, but neither of them was watching it. She had a case file open. He had a journal article he wasn't reading, and somewhere around 10 p.m., she looked up and said without any particular preamble, Tell me what happened, with Ranata, the real version. He looked at her. I've told you. You've told me the functional version, she said. The co-parenting went wrong, you grew apart, you both tried, and it didn't work. That's a summary. That's not the real version. She closed the case file. I'm not asking to analyze it. I'm asking because I want to understand you. And I think this is something I need to understand. He set the journal article down. This was the thing about Celeste. She did not ask questions she did not intend to sit with. When she asked for the real version of something, she meant it, and she was prepared to receive it, which was rarer than most people understood. He told her, not the summary version, the real one. The way the distance had built not in one moment, but in 100 small moments of him choosing work over presence, choosing to analyze Ranata's feelings, rather than sit inside them, with her choosing the comfortable management of emotional complexity over the uncomfortable rawness of being fully available. The way Ranata had tried to tell him gently then, directly then, with the quiet despair of someone who has been trying to communicate across a wall for years, and the way he had heard her words and processed them intellectually without ever letting them land where they needed to land. "I was present in every practical way," he said. "I was there. I showed up. I did everything that looked like being there. But I kept a distance. Inside. Even when I was standing in the same room, there was a part of me that was observing instead of being in it." He paused. "She said I treated our marriage like a patient, like something I was responsible for maintaining rather than something I was actually living in." Celeste was very still. "Was she right?" she asked. "Yes," he said, without qualification. "She was exactly right." She looked at him steadily. "What changed? What do you mean? You just described a pattern," she said. "A deep one. What makes you think it's different now?" He held her gaze. This was the question he had asked himself. The one Priya had answered from one direction. He was being asked it again from someone closer, and he understood that the answer he gave here was not something he could give imprecisely. "I don't know if I can prove it's different," he said. "I can tell you what I notice. I notice that when you say something I don't immediately start processing it into a manageable category. I just hear it. I can tell you that when you're not here, I don't feel relief the way I used to feel when I had space to myself. I feel..." He stopped. "I feel the shape of where you should be. That's different. That's new for me." She absorbed that. "I'm not Ranata," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not walking in as a comparison or a correction to something that failed. I know. I'm walking in as myself," she said. "And I need you to see me as myself, not as an opportunity to do it better." "Celeste." He leaned forward. "I see you. I've been seeing you for 2 years before I had a name for what I was looking at. I see exactly who you are. That's not the problem. That has never been the problem." "Then what is the problem," he said, "is that seeing you clearly means I can't protect myself from it anymore. I can see exactly who you are, which means I know exactly how much I stand to lose. And that's terrifying in a way that..." He stopped, looked at his hands. "That's the thing I've been managing. Not the feeling. The terror of the feeling." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I know about that." "I know you do. I turned down Chicago," she said. Not as a reminder, as something she was working through out loud. "And I don't regret it, but I want you to know that when I made that call, I was standing in my apartment shaking, because it was the first time in my adult life I had made a decision that wasn't..." She searched for the word. "Armored." It wasn't strategic. It wasn't optimized. It was just true. And true things are terrifying when you're someone who spent 20 years making sure the truth was always on her side before she said it. He looked at her. "You were shaking," he said. "Considerably," she said. "Don't tell anyone." Something in him, something that had been held tight for a very long time, released. Just a little. Just enough to breathe differently. "I won't," he said. She looked at him across the couch. The television murmured something neither of them was listening to. The apartment was quiet in the particular way it was quiet when it was full of something rather than empty. "I need you to tell me when you're managing," she said. "Not as a criticism, just I need to know. If you notice yourself retreating, I need you to say it. Because I can work with honesty. I cannot work with distance. I can't see." "Okay," he said. "And I will tell you," she said, "when I'm building a case instead of having a conversation. Because I do that. You know I do that." "I know. We are both," she said with the precise honesty that was fundamentally who she was. Extremely complicated people who are very good at managing things and very bad at surrendering to them. "That's accurate." "And we are choosing," she said, "to try anyway." He held her gaze. "Yeah," he said. We are. She nodded once, opened her case file again. He picked up the journal article. They sat in his apartment late in December with the city quiet outside and everything complicated between them and everything chosen, and they did not need to resolve it all tonight. They did not need it to be finished or certain or safe. They were in it. Fully. Both of them. And the managing was over. And the real work, the unglamorous Tuesday night hand-holding in the car, bringing dinner, I was short with you this morning, real work was not a burden. It was the thing itself. It was everything. And Solomon Reeves, sitting in apartment 4A with the woman from 4B, and the particular sound of two people learning how to be inside the same life, understood something he had been circling for 3 years. Ranata had been right. He hadn't known how to stay. But here right now, with this woman who brought dinner on Tuesdays and explained voir dire to his son and turned down Chicago, and told him she had been shaking here in this specific, ordinary, irreplaceable moment, he was staying, not perfectly, but fully, and for the first time, that felt like exactly enough. January in Nashville is the month that doesn't apologize for anything. The holidays had come and gone with the particular compressed intensity that holidays carry when you are inside a life that is changing everything. Slightly heightened, slightly more significant than it would have been in an ordinary year. Solomon had spent Christmas Eve with Miles at his apartment, and Celeste had knocked on the door at 7 p.m. with a pie she had baked herself, which surprised him because he had not known she baked, and when he said so, she said, "There are many things about me you don't know yet." And Miles had said with his mouth already full of pie, before it was even properly set down, "This is the best thing that has ever happened in this apartment." And Solomon had laughed and thought with a clarity that no longer frightened him the way it once had, that Miles was probably right. She had stayed until 10. Not dramatically, just the natural extension of an evening that didn't want to end. And when she left, Miles had waved from the couch and said goodnight, with the ease of someone for whom this had already become ordinary. And Solomon had walked her to the door, and they had stood there for a moment in the familiar threshold between inside and the hallway, and she had looked up at him and said, "Good Christmas, Dr. Reeves." "Good Christmas, counselor," he had said. And she had smiled, the real one, the slightly too wide one, the one she still sometimes looked briefly self-conscious about, and gone across the hall, and he had stood at his door and listened to the deadbolt click, and felt something warm and solid settle in his chest that he understood now was not hope exactly. It was something more established than hope. It was certainty. The quiet kind. The kind you don't announce. January brought cold and clarity, and unexpectedly the moment Solomon had not seen coming. He was on a Saturday shift covering for a colleague, the particular bureaucratic rearrangement of schedules that hospital life imposed without ceremony, and he had been gone since 6 a.m. and had texted Celeste that he wouldn't be back until evening, and she had responded, "Okay. I have briefs to write anyway. I'll save you some coffee." Which was a thing she said now naturally, without apparent awareness of how much it meant. He got home at 7:43 p.m. He was tired. The real kind, not the performed kind that people describe when they want sympathy, but the fundamental exhaustion that comes from a day of being precisely and completely present for people in crisis for 14 consecutive hours. He had held a family together for 3 hours, while their mother's status remained uncertain. He had delivered good news and difficult news, and navigated the impossible geography between them. He had been all day exactly who he needed to be, for everyone who needed him to be it. He stood in the elevator of the Carver building, and he let his shoulders come down for the first time all day, and he thought, "I just need to sit down." He knocked on 4B before he went to his own apartment. She opened the door and looked at him for exactly 1 second and said, "Come in." Not a question. She moved back from the door, and he came in and sat on her couch, the left side where she always sat, which he had moved to without thinking, and he put his head back and closed his eyes. He heard her in the kitchen, the particular sounds of her, the cabinet, the refrigerator, the soft movement of someone who had learned how to occupy a space without making it feel crowded. He did not open his eyes. He just listened to it. She came back and sat beside him, not on the chair across from the couch, not with 6 inches of cushion between them, but beside him. And she put a glass of water on the table in front of him, and she did not say anything. He opened his eyes and looked at her. "Bad day?" she asked. "Not bad," he said. "Just long, just a lot." She nodded. "You don't have to talk about it." "I know. But you can." "I know that too." He picked up the water, drank half of it, set it back down, and then, because she had asked him months ago to tell her when he was managing, rather than feeling, and because he had agreed and meant it, he said, "There was a family today, mother 3 adult kids, and she was the numbers weren't good, and I sat with them for 3 hours because that's what they needed, someone to sit with them in the not knowing, and He stopped. "I'm good at that. I'm good at being steady for other people in that. But today, it just..." He looked at his hands. "It cost something, and I don't always know what to do with the cost." Celeste was quiet for a moment. Then she moved slightly deliberately so that her shoulder was against his. Not a dramatic gesture, just contact, just presence. "You don't have to do anything with it right now," she said. "You can just sit here." He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah," she said. "That's allowed." He let out a breath he had been holding since approximately 11 a.m. They sat on her couch. The television was off. The apartment was quiet. He did not talk about the family, or the numbers, or the 3 hours of steady presence that had cost him something he didn't have a clinical name for. He just sat there with her shoulder against his, and the water on the table, and the specific silence of 4B, which he had been hearing through a wall for 2.5 years, and was only now learning from the inside. After a while, 20 minutes, maybe 30, he felt the exhaustion begin to shift. Not disappear. Just distribute differently the way weight does when someone helps you carry it without making a performance of the carrying. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not asking me to explain it." She looked at him sideways. "I'm a litigator. I know when not to press a witness." "Is that what I am?" "Sometimes," she said. "Less than you used to be." He smiled. She saw it and looked back at the wall across from them, but the corner of her mouth moved. "Solomon," she said. "Yeah." "I'm glad you knocked." He turned and looked at her. "So am I." February arrived, and with it came the thing that finally broke something open that had been waiting to break. It started with a conversation he had with Miles that he hadn't expected and couldn't have planned for. Miles was at his apartment for his regular weekend February. A Sunday afternoon sleet against the windows, the particular indoor intimacy of bad weather, and they were playing cards at the kitchen table. A game Miles had invented himself that had rules that shifted whenever Miles was losing, which Solomon accepted because 9-year-old card game logic was not a hill worth dying on. Miles won the hand, set down his cards with considerable satisfaction, then looked at his father with the direct, unmanaged gaze of a child who had been waiting to say something. "Dad," he said, "are you happy?" Solomon looked at his son. "What? Are you happy?" Miles said it the same way he said everything important, without preamble, without cushioning, with the clean precision of someone who had not yet learned to perform around the edges of a real question. Like actually. Not just okay happy. Actually happy. Solomon put his cards down, thought about deflecting, decided against it. "Yeah," he said, "I think I actually am." Miles absorbed this. "Because of Ms. Celeste. Because of a lot of things," he said, "but also, yeah, because of her." Miles nodded slowly. "She's happy too," he said with the certainty of someone who had conducted his own independent assessment. "I can tell because she does this thing where she forgets to look serious when she's talking to you. Her face goes different." Solomon was very quiet for a moment. "Her face goes different. Yeah, when you're in the room." Miles picked up the cards and started shuffling them with the focus of someone ending a significant conversation before it became uncomfortable. "I just wanted to know if you noticed." "I noticed," Solomon said softly. "Good," Miles said. Okay, new hand. I'm changing the point system. Of course you are. The rules in this game are more like guidelines. Miles. Yeah. Thank you, Solomon said, for telling me. Miles looked at him for a second, the child's clear, uncomplicated gaze. Dad, someone had to. That evening after Miles was in bed and the sleet had stopped and the apartment had settled into its Sunday night quiet, Solomon stood in the hallway between 4A and 4B for a long moment. He had stood in this hallway more times than he could count. He had stood here in the early days and called it nothing. He had stood here after the wedding and called it complicated. He had stood here in October and called it the beginning of something. He had stood here in December and called it real. He knew standing here now that he had run out of ways to qualify it. He knocked. She opened the door in the law school sweatshirt. Of course she did. It was Sunday evening. It was practically a uniform. And she looked at him and immediately read something in his face, because she always read something in his face. Now because they had been inside each other's lives long enough that the subtitles were built in. What is it? She said, not alarmed, just present. Can I come in? She stepped back. He came in. He didn't sit. He stood in her living room, the mirror image of his same layout opposite direction, and he looked at her and he said, Miles told me something today. What did he say? He said your face goes different when I'm in the room. She was very still. He's 9, she said carefully. He's observant, Solomon said. His word, actually important. He watched her. He asked me if I was happy. Actually happy, not just okay happy. And I said yes. And I said it was because of a lot of things and also because of you. She looked at him. The expression, the one he had finally named and was still adding vocabulary for, was fully visible now, not managed, not reduced, not held at a professional distance. Solomon, I want to say something, he said, and I want to say it clearly, not as a conversation opener, not as a preamble to a longer discussion, just as a thing that is true that I want you to have. She waited. The apartment was absolutely quiet around them. I love you, he said. I don't think I just started. I think I've been moving toward it since you walked into this building arguing on a phone call and didn't look at me once. I think it was already happening when I started making 2 cups of coffee on Thursday mornings without asking myself why. I think it was already done by the time you said 4 words under your breath at a wedding table, and I spent the rest of that night sitting on my couch in a dress shirt trying to pretend I hadn't heard them. He paused. I'm not saying it to change anything or to start something. I'm saying it because you told me not to manage instead of feel, and this is what I feel, and you deserve to have it said plainly. Celeste Navarro did not move for a long moment. And then she did the thing he had not seen her do once in 2.5 years. Not at depositions, not in hallways, not when Miles asked her impossible questions about jury selection, not even in the parking lot after the school play. Her eyes filled. She didn't cry. She was Celeste. She did not cry in front of people as a policy, and he understood that the policy was not vanity, but protection, and he was not going to make her feel exposed for it. But her eyes filled, and she looked at him with everything fully present, and nothing at all managed, and she said, I love you too. Her voice was steady. Just barely. I have been terrified of that for a very long time. And I told myself it was prudence. I told myself I was being careful. And then one night I sat down and asked myself what case I was actually building. And the only honest answer was, she stopped. The only honest answer was that I was afraid you'd see it and decide the distance was safer, that you'd take the out. I don't want the out, he said. I know, she said. I know that now. He crossed the room. Not dramatically, just 3 steps. The same steps he had been taking across this hallway in one form or another for 2.5 years. And he stood in front of her, and he reached up and did the thing she always did to him. He straightened something. The collar of the sweatshirt. Just that. Just the smallest, most ordinary gesture. The one that meant I see you. I'm here. I'm paying attention. She looked up at him. "You stole my move," she said. "I learned from the best." And she laughed. The real one, the slightly too loud one, the one she was briefly self-conscious about, and it filled her apartment, and he felt it in his chest, in the place that had been quiet for 3 years, and he thought, there it is, there's the thing. He kissed her, not a complicated kiss. Not a movie kiss, not staged or dramatic or built toward by swelling music. Just two people who had been standing on either side of a wall for 2.5 years, finally standing in the same room with nothing between them and the simplest, most natural consequence of that. When they stepped back, she looked at him. "Took you long enough," she said. "I was being careful." "You were being ridiculous." "Those are sometimes the same thing." She shook her head. But she was smiling, the real smile. Not managed, not reduced. Just hers completely in the low light of apartment 4B on a February Sunday, with the sleet finished outside and the city quiet, and everything exactly where it was supposed to be. He thought about Ranata's words more than once in the weeks that followed. "You don't know how to stay," and he held them not as wounds anymore, but as information. As the honest assessment of someone who had known him when he did not know himself, and who had been correct in a way that had cost them both something real. He had not known how to stay. He knew it now. Not perfectly. Not without the occasional retreat, the occasional moment of managing, instead of feeling the occasional Thursday morning when something came out sharper than he intended, and he had to go back and say, "That was me, not you, I'm sorry." It was not a cured condition. It was an ongoing practice, like running 4 miles, like keeping Miles's room ready, like making 2 cups of coffee on Thursday mornings, and meaning it. But the practice was real, and the intention behind it was real. And real was the only thing that had ever actually mattered. In March, he told Miles, not in a formal conversation, not a sit-down, serious face we need to talk arrangement, because Miles was 9 and 9-year-olds deserved better than the performance of adult gravity. He told him on a Saturday afternoon while they were watching basketball casually, the way you tell someone something true when you want them to receive it as ordinary rather than enormous. "Miles," he said during a timeout. "Yeah. You know how you asked me if I was happy?" Miles kept his eyes on the screen. "Yeah. And I said yes." "Yeah. I want you to know that I told Ms. Celeste." A pause. "The whole truth of it, and she told me the whole truth of it back." Miles turned and looked at him, just looked with those eyes that stored things. "And," he said. "And we're together," Solomon said. "Actually together, not just neighbors." Miles was quiet for 3 full seconds, which was a long time for Miles. Then he said, "Finally." Solomon blinked. "Finally? Dad, I have been waiting for this since like 4th grade. "You're in 4th grade now." "Exactly," Miles said. "It took you the whole year." He turned back to the game. "Is she going to come to more stuff like games and things?" "If you want her to." "I want her to," Miles said immediately. No deliberation required. "She understands sports the way a person who doesn't like sports tries to understand sports, which is actually kind of fun to explain things to." He considered this. "She asked me what a double-double was last week, and when I explained it, she said it sounded like an unconstitutional double jeopardy situation." Solomon laughed, the full kind. "That sounds exactly like her. It's very on-brand." Miles agreed with the serenity of a 9-year-old who had adopted someone's linguistic patterns without being aware of it. "Can we get pizza tonight? All 3 of us?" "I'll ask her." "Tell her it's a significant occasion," Miles said. "She likes significant occasions." "How do you know that?" Miles gave him a look of mild, affectionate pity. "Dad, I've been paying attention." They got pizza. All 3 of them around Solomon's kitchen table, because Miles had opinions about restaurants, and his opinion tonight was that the kitchen table was better. Celeste arrived with her own contribution, a salad, because she said someone in this group needed to contribute a vegetable, and she was not going to be the person who let a 9-year-old and a doctor eat exclusively pizza without adult intervention. Miles ate 2 bites of the salad, decided his vegetable obligation was technically fulfilled, and moved on to the pizza with no apparent guilt. "Ms. Celeste," he said with his mouth full, which she gently indicated was not ideal. "Miles." He swallowed. "My dad told me." She looked across the table at Solomon, who gave her a small nod. She looked back at Miles. "How do you feel about it?" she asked. Directly, honestly, the way she always talked to him like he was a person whose answer mattered. Miles picked up another slice. Thought about it with apparent genuine consideration. "I feel like it makes sense," he said. "You were already here a lot. Now there's just a reason for it." He looked at her. "Are you going to change stuff? Like, is it going to be different?" "Some things will probably change," she said. "But the important things, the way I talk to you, the way I show up, those things don't change because of what's happening with your dad and me. Those things are just about you and me." "Okay." Miles looked at her for a moment, testing it the way he tested things, not cynically, but carefully, with the particular judgment of a child who had been through enough to know that adults sometimes said things that sounded right but didn't hold. He seemed to find it held. "Okay," he said. "Then, can you explain what a technical foul is? Because my dad explains it wrong." "I explain it correctly," Solomon said. "He explains it technically correctly and practically wrong," Miles said. "There's a difference." Celeste looked at Solomon. "Is there a difference?" "Apparently." She looked back at Miles. "Explain the distinction." And Miles did at length, with the full force of his considerable opinions on basketball officiating. And Celeste listened and asked questions and argued 2 of his points with the same precision she brought to depositions. And Miles loved every second of it. And Solomon sat at his kitchen table with pizza getting slightly cold in front of him and watched the 2 of them argue about technical fouls and felt something so complete and so specific that he didn't want to name it in case the naming reduced it. He just let it be there, the way you let the real things be. April came, and with it something Solomon had not anticipated. An ordinary evening that he understood only afterward had been the moment everything settled into its final shape. It was a Friday. Celeste had come over, just the knock. The door opening, the 2 glasses, the way it had always been, the sequence so familiar now it required no thought. They were watching something, some show she had been recommending for months that he had finally agreed to start, and somewhere around the 40-minute mark, she had fallen asleep. Not dramatically. Not consciously. She had been working since early morning, and the week had been long, and she simply, between one moment and the next, was asleep. On the left side of the couch, her feet tucked underneath her the way she always tucked them when something surprised her. Except now, it was sleep that had surprised her. Her head tilted toward him. Her case file still open on the cushion beside her, a pen loosely in her hand. Solomon reached over carefully and moved the case file to the table, took the pen from her fingers, covered her with the blanket from the back of the couch. He turned the television volume down. He stayed. He picked up the journal article he still hadn't finished reading, and he sat beside her in the quiet apartment, and he listened to her breathe. And outside, Nashville was doing what Nashville did on Friday nights, indifferent and alive and full of its own ordinary enormities. And inside apartment 4, there was just this: a woman asleep on a couch, a man beside her. The accumulated weight of 2.5 years of small moments that had never been nothing, that had been building this entire time toward something that required no announcement and no ceremony and no grand gesture to confirm. He thought about the joke at the wedding. "She's my wife." He thought about 4 words whispered across a reception table so quiet he almost hadn't heard them. "I wish you meant that." He thought about the drive home, the hallway, the Thursdays, the Fridays, the coffee cups and the case files and the color-coded calendar with dark blue for him, the parking lots and the school plays and the dinner pancakes. The terrible, patient, essential work of 2 people deciding over and over in the ordinary moments to stay. He had meant it. He had meant it before he knew he meant it, which was perhaps the most honest thing he had ever done. She stirred slightly. Her eyes didn't open. "Solomon," she said in the half-conscious voice of someone not quite asleep and not quite awake. Yeah, he said quietly. Don't go anywhere. He looked at her. At the woman who had walked into his lobby with a sprained wrist and a winning phone call. Who had borrowed Tylenol and a charger and 30 minutes of his Friday evenings until they became something neither of them had a word for yet. Who had said 4 words at a table that changed the geometry of everything. Who had turned down Chicago. Who had shaken while she made the call. Who had told him the honest version and demanded it back. Who had made his son feel seen and explained voir dire and remembered dark blue on a color-coded calendar. Who was asleep on his couch on a Friday night and didn't want him to go anywhere. I'm not going anywhere, he said. She didn't respond. She was already back under deep, steady breathing, the abandon of someone who had decided she was safe. Solomon Reeves sat back. He turned the page of his journal article. He read 3 lines and retained all of them, which was notable, given how rarely he had managed that in the last several months. Outside the window, Nashville moved through the night without comment. Inside, apartment 4. Everything was ordinary. Everything was exactly right. And this, the staying, the choosing, the daily, unglamorous, sacred practice of being present for someone who was present for you, was not the end of something. It was the thing itself. It was what love looked like when you finally stopped diagnosing it and simply let it live. And Solomon Reeves, the careful man, the measured man, the man who had spent 3 years calling real things by smaller names, had finally completely with his whole unguarded heart arrived.